Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, and welcome to another edition of Sabbath Sunday. This is where Darren and I get together with you to discuss all things Black Sabbath. And we have a fun episode for you today. We are going to be talking about some of our favorite unofficial bootleg live recordings from the Ozzy era of the band. We're going to break this up. We're going to be doing episodes about the Dio era and the various eras, but we thought we would focus on the Ozzy era of the band. And these are recordings that are, I made a video on my channel discussing the difference between a bootleg and an unauthorized recording. I'll try to remember to link that down below if people want to get into more, hear me talk a little bit more specifically about this. But these are, for all intensive purposes, these are unofficial, unauthorized recordings. And they're out there. They're out there on the internet. Before the internet, you used to go, Darren, I'm sure you remember this, going to record shows, and people
Oh
would
yeah.
have CDs, burnt
Oh yeah.
CDs that you could buy these shows, VHS tapes of live TV broadcasts and videos and stuff like that. And now with the dawn of the internet, with the internet out there, you can go and you can find all these shows, and with YouTube too, pretty much all these shows that we're going to be talking about here, you can listen to on YouTube. So we thought what we would do is that we would collect our five favorite. I picked five, Darren picked five, uh, and we would share them with you and tell you why we think these are some of our favorite unauthorized bootleg shows from the Ozzy era of the band. But before we do that, Darren has some vinyl that he's going to show us, and we're also going to talk about some of the, if you're new to this, if you haven't ever delved into this world of unauthorized and bootleg recordings, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the most common shows that you would see if you walk into your record shop and they carry some of these records, CDs. These are the most common shows you're going to see out there. We sort of stayed away from the real common ones. We wanted to go a little bit deeper. Uh, but yeah, so take it away, Darren. Tell us about the world of Sabbath unauthorized and bootleg recordings.
Well, like you said, there's been a lot that have been floating around, and by a lot I mean probably about four or five, four or five shows that have been floating around for forever. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Before the internet, we'd go to record expos and conventions, and you'd go through. The guy had the whole layout of all these CDs, and you'd look through Black Sabbath and Ozzy or whatever you were into at the time, and I have one of them. This one goes back probably to the early '90s. This one's
Mm.
called Shockwave over
Over
Texas.
Texas. I've got that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's called Shockwave over Texas because it's one of the few shows where they actually played Shockwave. But we'll get to '78 in a little bit. But anyway, this is just an example of what these things looked like. They were sort of professional looking. They had a screened CD, little booklet, some pictures. Some pictures very rarely actually like lined up with the timeline of the actual
Yeah.
recording. Like you get a picture of Black Sabbath from 1971 for a '78 performance, but it's the thought that counts, and it was always something cool. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
So that was the state of affairs in the '90s, and then when everybody got on the internet, and then started sharing these, and you would get better quality because, well, in most cases, because people would upload them on file sharing sites, and you'd get WAV files or FLAC format, which was lossless. And these are actually the better way to listen to them because especially in the live bootleg, the live recording situation, I know when I listen to MP3 source, which I very rarely do because of the way that they sound. When you're taking recordings that it's not manufactured like a record, the quality is. And John, I don't know if you've mentioned we haven't talked about the soundboard versus the audience
Hmm.
recordings, but early on, most of the recordings that you would encounter would be audience, which means that somebody came in with a tape recorder and
Yeah.
recorded the concert. And it really, a lot of it, and some of these are funny when you're listening to the early ones, because they might be like getting into it and they hit the recorder, and the tape like jumps around.
Yeah.
So it kind of adds to the charm of it, but it can also be kind of frustrating. And also, it would depend on where they are standing in the room. Are they close to the PA speaker? Are they
Yep.
somewhere, in the middle of the auditorium? Are they too close to the front of the stage? And so, with the audience recordings, that's really what determines the sound quality. It's something pretty much, it relies on something that primitive. As time went on, then you'd have soundboard recordings, and that was where the recorder was running directly from the soundboard. So the sound was mixed. Um, there's a lot more balance in the overall sound. You know, occasionally, you'd hear keyboards really bright, or maybe the bass was too loud, but it was definitely a better sound quality because it was coming to the mixing board. So some of these recordings are soundboard, some are audience, and then we get into the ones that were licensed for FM broadcasts. And John, you and I were talking about how it seems as though it's easier for companies, or for people to put these things out, because the FM radio stations, or whoever it was that secured the rights to broadcast these, own them. And so they're not really illegal because they are owned by the broadcasting company. And these are the ones that we encounter most frequently. We're talking about California Jam from '74, the Ontario Motor Speedway. We're talking about Paris 1970, which is actually
Yep.
a television broadcast. Um, let's see what else. Uh,
Uh, yeah.
Hammersmith Odeon
Yep.
1978, The Never Say Die Live, very
Yep.
popular. That's been on audio format, as well as
Ashbury Park,
Asbury Park. Yeah, Providence, Rhode
70,
Island too.
Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah, those are,
74.
yeah.
Yeah. So these are the ones, and we kind of, when we decided to do this, we thought, we threw some of these out. Oh, let's talk about Rhode Island. Let's talk about California Jam. Like, let's not, because most people have already heard these and they're really familiar with them. Let's do a deeper dive and get into some of the ones that circulate on the underground, that are popular among collectors but not popular to the mainstream. So that's kind of what I did. And I picked basically one from. So we're doing the Ozzy era first, and I picked one from every year. I'm going. So we're going to start at '69, and we're going to finish up in '78. And I picked basically the best, and I have about 175 Black Sabbath live recordings from '69. I stop at around 95. I stop at Forbidden. I didn't go into the reunion, but maybe at some point I'll start collecting those. But I have about 175, 150, 175 live recordings from that span of time. So we're talking about certain years, like for instance, in 1970, the band played, which is probably the busiest time in Black Sabbath's career. 1970, the band played 175 shows. So you're going to come across a lot of shows from 1970. Some are good, some are bad, some are in between. Um, and when you're getting all these shows and you're listening to them, you start to have a pretty high threshold for what sounds good and what sounds
Yeah.
bad. By conventional standards, they pretty much all sound bad. There's
Yeah.
not something, for the most part, when you're talking about the tape trading circuit. People will rate these things, A minus or B plus, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to sound incredible. When you listen to what the criteria for their A minuses, or their A or their B score, it's like, it means it's audible. It means you can pretty much hear everything, and it's
Yeah.
it's just, you can hear basically the music and the vocals. But as you start to, when you listen to these things, your ears start to grow accustomed to these things, and you
Yeah.
actually do enjoy them for what they are. And now the soundboard recordings are noticeably better. But the audience, man, you're really, you're in the dark. You don't know until
Yeah.
you put that thing on, and then even sometimes the person who's recording it will move around. So like in the first song or
Yeah.
two, it's
You
gonna sound
you
really
can hear a
bad.
tape player in their pocket, being
Yeah, but by like the third or fourth song, they found like a really good spot to chill, and it's like, oh yeah, just stay there. You're like saying it, stay there, and the sound quality improves as it goes on. So what I thought it would be fun to do is to get into some of these. Like I picked one from every year that I personally enjoy, and that doesn't mean that they sound the best.
yeah,
I'm rating on performance, and I'm also rating it on deep cuts, because sometimes early on in a tour, the band would pick a few songs to support the album. As time went
yeah,
on, they drop them. So some of the ones that I picked have some of the deep cuts, and that was my criteria. So when I recommend these, and you go and maybe you check them out on YouTube, and you're like, oh my god, that sounds like crap. Yes, it does. Not always, not always, but when you're first adjusting to it, you'll be like, oh man, that doesn't sound good at all. But then when you give
yeah,
it a little bit more time and your ears start to adjust to it, you start some of the things start to pop out. Like, wow, Ozzy sounds really good. As far as how audible he is, he sounds really good. Or wow, that's a really cool solo that Tony did. I haven't heard that before, because most of the solos that Tony does are often improv. So it's things like that that really make the recordings interesting and collectible. The other thing is with live recordings, if you're a super fan like I am, and you, John, there's only so much you get out of the records. The records are manufactured. They're there. They're very manufactured. It's a product. With these live recordings, when you're listening to them, it kind of almost brings you in the moment. For me, I kind of feel a connection it, to the band when I'm listening to them. Like, and I'm visualizing while I'm listening to it, like, wow, I wonder what I've seen pictures from 1971. Geezer's probably playing that bass, or from 1975, he's
yeah,
probably playing a Rickenbacker. Or you can visualize these things, and you can hear the crowd, you can hear the ambiance, and it's much more of an organic type of thing. And for me, there's more of a connection to the music when you're listening to these live performances. It's like you're in the moment. There's nothing overdubbed. There's nothing overthought. It's
hmm,
spontaneous. It's live. It's in the moment. And even though it was recorded in 1971, I'm listening to it in 2024. And then for all intents and purposes, I'm at the show. And that's what's really cool about it. So, as a fan, it's really cool to have these. I know there's other groups that have bands that pursue a lot of live recordings. But when you start to get into Black Sabbath, there are a lot. And once you find a place to get them, you can just go crazy, and you can just start getting them, so much to the point where it's hard to listen to all of them, because there's like a well of just.
yeah,
And oftentimes people will come with an unreleased recording. Somebody will just come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden you'll hear a recording from 1974 that you've never heard before, and it sounds good.
yeah.
Or
It's
you'll hear
amazing.
like a 1976 recording where Backstreet Kids is played, and it might sound like it was recorded, like the recorder was in somebody's shoe, but you want it because it's got Backstreet Kids on it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Backstreet Kids is only played like 3 times or something in
yeah.
1976 or 77. So it's things like that. It is pretty exciting when you start to get into collecting these things. So
And it should be, I'd like to add, I agree with everything that you said. I'd like to add that you do have to change, when I'm listening to a unreleased live recording in this setting, I am changing my expectations, like you said. And as time goes on, what somebody was able to do and record in 1970, it does start to get a little bit better as the years go on. If you've never delved into like 70s unreleased recordings like this, you can't think of it like somebody with a cell phone and an audience in this modern age, right? So you sort of lower your what you're expecting. It's not really about sound quality here. I mean, it is to a certain degree, but it's more about the historical aspects of these recordings. It's the fly on the wall, the snapshot of a moment in time. And as you dive deeper into these things, you begin to appreciate uh, the differences and the spontaneity and what you're catching in these recordings. For instance, in the 70s, Black Sabbath was much like a lot of bands from that era, like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. They did a lot of jamming. So you'll get multiple instances where the band, especially like early on, let's say in Wicked World, they were known to go off and jam in Wicked World. So you get these weird little anomalies like where they're playing the riff to Rock and Roll Doctor before Rock and Roll Doctor was even released. You can hear Megalomania before that was even released, little snippets of riffs. You can hear Iommi experimenting and jamming on different things. They used to jam in Sabracadabra was another spot where they would sort of stretch out and jam. So you're sort of taking all these things in where even though sonically it doesn't may not sound particularly good, you're catching this they were a lot. I guess what I'm saying is that Sabbath was a lot more spontaneous in the 70s. They jammed a lot more in the 70s than they did as time went on, especially when we get to the 80s. And as the 80s move on, things get a little bit more regimented. Like a lot of bands in the 70s, they stretched out. And so that's the fun for me personally of a lot of these things is hearing these in the moment things that they never you might hear I only play some lick or riff or something that you've never heard him play before. And so when these audience recordings, you have to keep in mind again that they're audience recordings, somebody with a tape recorder in their pocket or in their hand or something like that. In regards to the soundboard recordings, they can be jarring in a different way. There'll be more clarity there of the sound because it's coming directly from the soundboard. You say, well, how did these people get this? Well, it can happen in a bunch of ways. It can be, and I've heard people say this, I knew the sound guy and he let me plug my tape recorder into the soundboard. It can be somebody, the band was making recordings for them to use as a reference, just personal references, and it leaks out and somebody leaks it out into the public. The problem that you'll get with soundboards is that when the sound engineer, the mixer guy is listening, if the guitar is really loud on stage and you're getting bleed out of the live amplifier on stage, coming through the soundboard, the guitar may be turned down a little bit. So you hear the recording and it's like, man, why is the bass so loud? And why is the kick drum so loud? Well, because those weren't coming off the stage as much as the guitar was.
Yeah.
Or maybe the vocals tend to also usually be really loud with
Yeah.
soundboard recordings. And that's the reason for that. Audience recording, you're getting the PA columns, the PA speakers, you're getting that. The radio broadcasts are a different animal altogether too. You know, you're getting more of a mixed thing, but that can also have some weird levels and balances to it. So those shows that Darren and I mentioned, Ontario Speedway, Paris 70, Hammersmith 78, these are the shows that usually if you're in your local record shop, you may see some version of it. And you may see them with multiple covers. When you held up that Shockwave over Texas, I had a smile because mine has the exact same cover. That's usually not the case. Like usually they repackage these things, they put different covers on them, they call them different things. Part of the fun of collecting these early bootlegs when you would go to these record shows was that sometimes these things weren't accurate. They would mislabel a song title. They would just not have things right. They just wouldn't be accurate because they're unofficial, you know, and so you never
Yeah.
know what you're going to get. So we focused on the Ozzy era here. We wanted to dive a little bit deeper, like we said, the Paris 70 and stuff like that. Those are all over everywhere, but we wanted to go a little bit deeper. So how do we want to start this, Darren? Where do you want to start with this?
Okay. Well, let's start 1969.
Yeah.
Dumfries. That was the holy grail for several years. In fact, John, you and I had conversations about Dumfries. I remember talking about our speculation of what do you think's keeping it from coming out? Oh, well, I'm sure that Sharon is probably she probably has a kind of some sort of a lockdown on it. And wow, I mean, I wonder if it'll ever be released. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, it just dropped, and there it was. and
And
people
this
were
was one
sitting
of
there
the
going crazy.
early, this was one of the, we should have looked this up when this dropped on the internet, but I remember it dropped before I don't think YouTube was out at that time. And it was like one of these, for me with Black Sabbath, one of these first like internet come out of nowhere, like, whoa, where did this come from? And it seemed like
Dumfries?
everybody was talking about it, like, oh my
No,
God, this Dumfries show just came out. And it's like,
yeah, no, that was just a couple years ago where the full show came out. Because I mean, it was like the Holy Grail. People were talking about it and like forum boards and stuff like that, talking about, oh, one of these days somebody, I'd like to know who it is that has that recording of the Dumfries '69 show, because word came out that somebody had it. And the guy, his name was Alex Wilson. He plays in the band Iron Claw, a '70s band, heavy '70s band, Iron Claw. Alex Wilson was the guy that recorded it, and I guess he held on to it and didn't want to release it until he felt like the time is right, and that was about 2 or 3 years ago.
well,
Um,
just to
but
clarify with that, because I did look this up and I saw a quote from him, and he said that Sharon in the Osborne camp bought this, and he doesn't know how it got leaked out to the internet. To his knowledge, the Osbournes found out he had this, they bought it off of him, and it somehow appeared on the internet. Maybe he's just
I
saying that,
kind of doubt
to
that.
cover himself.
Kind of doubt that, but it's a good story. It's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good story, but I don't see how if they had it, they wouldn't have marketed it in somehow, or they wouldn't have made music. It wouldn't have leaked out. I'm sure they would have had plenty of legal control over it, but it leaked, and it's really cool. It's cool because there's some songs. Well, after
Right.
it leaked out, of course,
Historical significance of this one, yeah, is important because it's one of
the
the
historical
earliest.
significance.
Yeah.
It is, and it was recorded live at Rugman Youth Club in Dumfries, Scotland, on November 16th, 1969, just one day before debut album sessions of Regent Studios. Taped by Alex Wilson, and it wasn't long after it leaked out in the audio world that somebody decided to make a vinyl version of it, and I bought it, and it's cool. They went to some, they put some care into the packaging of it, which is always nice. You've got like what we can assume would be probably not the show, but a show in and around that same time frame. But the thing that's cool about it is we've got Warning, which Warning was only performed. Let's see, what do I got here? Warning, warning, warning. I think it's only been performed about 4 times. Uh, and this is one of those times. Also, we've got the song Blue Blooded Man, which is a blues song. We've got Early One Morning, it's a cover. Um, Let Me Love You Baby. Got some blues songs on here, as well as Wicked World. They open with Wicked World. We've got Behind the Wall of Sleep and the NIB. So it's 3 songs that made it onto the debut, and the rest of the material is basically jams and blues covers. So that makes it pretty cool. Not only in that regard, but because it is the band when they were young, and you can kind of hear them playing off of each other,
Yeah.
getting used to how they would improvise later on so well. It's a little bit in the early stages of that, so it's pretty cool to hear that. So from the historical standpoint,
Yeah. Yeah, this is an important one because as it stands right now, this is the earliest known recording of the band, correct?
yeah, as far as we know,
Yeah,
the
as
band
far
was
as we
playing
know.
in 1968, so there could be, who knows, there could be a recording that
Right.
comes up
So
either
you,
before this or in 1968. You never know.
so you get Sabbath transitioning. What's also, I think, really cool about this, and you mentioned this, they're sort of transitioning out of being a blues band. They started off as Earth, where they were just a straight up blues band. And
Right.
so you've got them, you still got some remnants of them playing these blues covers, like the songs that you mentioned. You also get a song titled "Song for Jim,"
Yep.
which is rare because, for those that don't know, there's stories and acknowledgement that Black Sabbath recorded some demos before the first album was released. And on them are three or four songs that people talk about the most: The Rebel, When I Came Down, and Song for Jim, right?
Hmm.
Those are like the three that nobody really knows anything about. There was a little snippet of The Rebel played in a uh, VHS documentary that the band put out years ago, and everybody at that time, that might have been, at least for me, that was the first time I ever heard a clip of The Rebel. Uh, so don't get too excited out there, though, people, because Song for Jim is it's a Tony Iommi playing flute, which is interesting in itself. There's actually no guitar on it, but it's really just a simple little instrumental with Iommi playing flute, and the majority of the song is a drum solo in this setting. So there really isn't much to it, but there is some historical note there that it is an original that they wrote themselves, a song for Jim. Jim, what was his name? Their manager,
Jim Simpson.
Jim
Simpson.
Simpson. Right. So that's who the song for Jim part of it is there. So this show has a lot going for it. It's the earliest known recording of the band as of now. It's got some of these old blues covers on it. It's got Song for Jim. It's got The Warning, which was on the first record, but barely ever got played live. So this one has a lot going for it. And actually, the sound quality, considering what it is and the year that it is actually pretty decent,
Yeah.
all things considered. It's a pretty decent. There can be some of these audience recordings, which is what this is, that just sound like
Yeah.
it's somebody's tape recorders in a sock in the bathroom at the venue, but this actually sounds pretty good, and
It's
can
very
really,
audible.
yeah, it's very audible, and it sounds pretty good. So this is one for everybody to definitely check out, which is Dumfries, Scotland, November 16th, 1969, the Rugman's Youth Club. So that's one to
Yep.
definitely check out. So, all right, what did you have something from 1970? Maybe we can just move through the years here.
Yeah, so 1970, like I said, it was a busy year for the band. 175 shows they played in 1970. I have a lot of recordings. The sound quality is hit or miss, but I bought this from the company called Plastic Head, based in the UK. They put a bunch of Black Sabbath live stuff up, and I was intrigued, so I bought a couple. I liked them, and then I bought all of them. So, but this one is from Lausanne, 1970, and it's a really good recording. We also hear Warning on this too. So, Warning actually was performed live 8 times in the 70s, and I think the last time it was performed was 1971, early 1971. Uh, but here we have Behind the Wall of Sleep, NIB, Black Sabbath, Sleeping Village. Warning is cut in half between sides. So it ends side B, and all of side C is a double record set. All of side C is Warning, the continuation of Warning. We get Berries Where Boots Wore Pigs, and again, Blue Coat Man, which Blue Coat Man, this was the last live performance of Blue Coat Man. So we first heard Blue Coat Man on Dumfries. Actually, I think there was two shows at Dumfries, one in the afternoon and I think one in the evening.
Yeah.
But I know that there's two shows and they were at Dumfries in the same date. So I can only assume that it was at different times, two sets with 2 times same set, or at least to the point where Blue Coat Man was performed twice. So 3 times altogether in the 70s, twice at Dumfries and once at Lausanne. But this is really nice packaging. It's a good recording, and it's worth putting some money into the packaging because it sounds good, looks good, a lot of fun to listen to, a lot of fun to have. You got red vinyl, so they went all out. Um, it's released on a company called Fallen Angel, which I'm sure is just not a real record label. It's just somebody who decided to put a name to it. But from all the 1970 recordings I have, this one I feel is the best because the other ones I have, it isn't this complete show. It's missing, it's either missing a song or the sound quality isn't quite as good, and you don't really hear the guitar. When Tony's improvising, you don't really hear it that well. This everything has a pretty nice equal sound quality, and the big takeaway for me is Warning live. Warning sounds really really good on this. Sounds very dark and heavy
Yeah.
and great. So that's my
Uh,
pick from 1970, Lausanne.
yeah. So you've heard Darren mention how many times Warning was played live. If you're interested to looking this up in Black Sabbath or any, you can do this with any band. If you go to setlist.fm, you can eventually work your way down to a screen that'll show you Black Sabbath's most played songs, and you can even go to the albums and you can see which songs were played from which albums, how many times they were played, and if the information is available, where they were played. So that's pretty fascinating. Another interesting thing is, as you mentioned, that Fairies Wear Boots is on there. And with the reunion era, Fairies Wear Boots got played all the time. But if you go to setlist.fm, you can do this too. You can click on an individual song and you can see when it was played. It'll give you a little bar graph, how many times it was played in this year and that year. Outside of the early years, they stopped playing Fairies Wear Boots for a while. So it's kind of interesting to hear them playing Fairies Wear Boots in these early years, like 70, 71. They were kind of quick to drop it, which is kind of funny because it's a song that when the reunion era happened, they just played it all the time. But back in this time frame, they only played it for these first couple years in the 70s, and then it kind of dropped really low there and didn't get played that much. So yeah, that's a cool show. Uh, so let's move on to 1971. So I have a show, Oval Hall, City Hall, Sheffield, UK, January 14th, 1971. This one is interesting. The sound quality on this one, it's an audience. It isn't that great even by audience standards, but you get Into the Void with some alternate lyrics to it, an early version of Into the Void, and you also get an early version of After Forever that also has alternate lyrics too. And if I'm remembering this show correctly, you even get Ozzy singing a slightly different melody on Into the Void with the last verse. So you get War Pigs, Into the Void, alternate lyrics, Iron Man, a guitar intro to the song Black Sabbath, and then the song Black Sabbath, After Forever with alternate lyrics, Wicked World, Fairies Wear Boots, and Paranoid. So this one makes the list for me for these early versions of Into the Void and After Forever.
Yeah, I like the sound quality of this. I think it sounds good. I mean, within reason. I can listen to this and I really enjoy it. I think that there's a real good bass presence. Ozzy sounds good. I think everything's audible. The drums are a little bit in the background. They're a little bit polite, but overall, I mean, I think it sounds really good for a bootleg. In fact, um, this is my go-to for 1971 too. So we both picked Sheffield. And yeah, it's cool hearing Into the Void. The lyrics are different um, in certain verses. There is a different melody. It's either like Ozzy does an extra like little melody in a bridge part or in a segue that didn't end up on the record, which is probably for the better because it doesn't really sound that good, but it's cool to hear it. After Forever, it's just gibberish. He's just I don't know what he's saying.
Yeah,
I don't know what he's singing, but maybe it gives you some insight as to how these melodies came about. Everybody likes to say, "Well, Ozzy didn't do anything except sing." Well, I think it's been well noted that Ozzy did come up with a lot of the melodies, and then from there it would go to Geezer, and Geezer would actually write cohesive lyrics. But before that happened, some of these songs were probably just they opted to perform them live, and Ozzy was just left to his own devices, just sort of ad libs. And I think that's what's going on here in After Forever. So it's a little distracting because your ear, you want to hear the lyrics that you're familiar with, that you've been listening to for who knows how many years, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So it's a little bit distracting from that perspective, but it's definitely cool from the historical perspective that you're hearing something, a song that, of course, is on Master of Reality, which is one of the more popular albums, and it's a song that everybody's heard, everybody's familiar with, but you're hearing it in its infant stages, and that's really cool. But overall, and again, Fairies Wear Boots is on here, as you mentioned. We've got a grandiose version of Wicked World with some jamming. Anytime they played Wicked World, though, you'd always have a
Yeah,
jam. And every time you hear Wicked World and the recording, and any recording, it's always different. So you never know what you're going to get. So just because it starts off as Wicked World and you think, it's Wicked World, I've heard this a million times. Well, you probably haven't heard it this
right.
way, and
Yeah,
almost for sure it's going to be different from the last time you've heard it. So that's cool. That there is that organic, improvisational, jammy aspect to the band's sound at this point. And like you said, I totally agree. As when they got into the 80s, or even in the second part of the 70s, things started to get pretty by the note, by the numbers. The solo would be pretty much the same. The jams would sometimes they'd vary a little bit, but not as much as they did in the early days. So when you listen to the early recordings, 70, 71, you're going to hear some pretty cool jams and some in the moment type of things going on. But yeah, I really like Sheffield, and I have and I believe this was recorded by Alex Wilson as well. He wrote something. I think he's on Facebook, and I'm pretty sure that you and I are friends with him. I think one time I know I reached out to him to try to get him to come on to either do the podcast or the show or something, and I think we decided that his his accent was so thick that we couldn't understand what he was saying. So that might be a problem. Maybe we'll work that out in the future, because he's really part of
yeah.
Black Sabbath history for sure. So 1971, I believe he also recorded this show in Newcastle City Hall, Newcastle, England. This is 4 days later. Same set list. Sound quality isn't quite as good as the Sheffield show, but again, like I said, you're getting a different version of Wicked World. Longer jams, longer guitar solo. I think at one point Tony gets lost and he can't find his way out. That's kind of cool to hear. But we go from Paranoid, ripping version of Paranoid kicks this off. NIB, War Pigs, Into the Void. Same situation as the Sheffield Into the Void. We're getting some different parts, some different lyrics. Iron Man, Black Sabbath, After Forever with alternate lyrics. The Wicked World, like I just mentioned, with some improvisational surprises. Bears Wear Boots, and the encore, surprise, surprise, is Paranoid again. So they played Paranoid twice in this set, and it's kind of interesting. The reprieve for Paranoid.
Yeah.
So yeah, 1971. Because in 1971 was another busy year apparently for Black Sabbath, because they did 121 shows in
Wow.
1971. So between 70 and 71, that was the time when they were just playing all the time. In fact, when we went into our podcast and we got into the history of Volume 4, we talked about some of the sources that we cited, that the band was pretty much like burned out on playing all the time. And when they recorded these albums, they basically went in and recorded them as if it were a live set,
Hmm.
because they were so familiar with the songs, they could bust them out one or two takes, very few overdubs. But when it came time to do Volume 4, and they kind of like pulled the reins back a little bit, got more into the production, the overdubs, and things like that, and has less of a live kind of a feel to it, because it was more this sort of thing where they wanted to get different sounds, and they wanted to do the album, and they wanted to take a different course with Volume 4 than they did with the uh, previous 3 albums. So that brings us to 1972.
Before you go on to 1972, I just wanted to comment. It's interesting if you go back to that Dumfries show and you listen to the warning, how much it sounds like it really proves to you that on the first album they went in and just played live,
Yeah,
because the tempos are the same, the pretty much it's exactly, it's very, very similar to the
yeah,
first album, and it really lets you hear how when they went into that first record, they just played the show that they had been playing probably dozens and
Yeah.
dozens of times. That's why they were able to do that, because they just went in and they played their live show. So,
Yeah.
all right, 72. What do you got for 72?
1972, I have Hara Arena in Dayton, Ohio, July
Mm,
15th, 1972. The reason I picked this, the sound quality is pretty decent. It's definitely audible. It's definitely listenable. But we get Under the Sun.
yeah,
We get Wheels of Confusion.
yeah.
And it says the straightener, but the straightener is that instrumental that's kind of with the flute, I think.
Hmm.
The last 2 minutes of the song. That's not actually on here, but it is Wheels of Confusion. Very cool early version, but very similar to the studio version. But it's just cool hearing these because Under the Sun was performed 24 times, which now you think, I mean, oh, that seems like a lot. But when you get further into the catalog and how, like, well,
Hmm.
for instance, Paranoid's probably been played like 1,000 times.
Yeah,
So by contrast or by comparison, 24 times is not a lot.
yeah.
So it's a rarity. Wheels of Confusion only 7 times,
Wow.
and it's 7 times in the 70s. So that makes it a pretty special performance. And again, I mean, this is the sort of thing where it's the beginning of the tour. They have these songs. They made a set list. They're going to play them. And then as time goes on, because there's other shows from 72 where you don't hear Under the Sun, you don't hear Wheels of Confusion because they were dropped. Now, it could have been that they just didn't have enough time, or it could have been they didn't enjoy playing them live, or they didn't get quite the reaction that they expected. So somewhere along the line, they decided to omit these songs. But here in the early part of the tour, we've got these two songs. So that's pretty cool,
Yeah, that's
historically
a good
speaking.
show. It's pretty good quality. I think
Yeah,
Iommi's really on. And I should say that if you're somebody who, when I went to revisit these recordings to try to get a list together, it reminded me of how great the band was in the 70s. And Ozzy, who's notorious for not very good live vocal performances, when you think about him, especially with the last so many tours that he did with Black Sabbath in the reunion era, some of his live solo stuff, Ozzy is really hit or miss. In the 70s, he was on most of the time, at least on these recordings, these group of recordings. I mean, there's times where you can hear him struggling a little bit,
yeah,
but it's nowhere near like the way his voice would
no,
struggle in the last, like, let's say 20 years or so, where it just sounds like his voice is completely blown out. I mean, there's some of these recordings where he just sounds great. His
yeah,
voice is just really
yeah,
projecting and just cutting through, and the band is really on fire, and it just reminds you of what a great live band Black Sabbath was at this time. They were a really, really good live band. And you can sort of hear this too. This is the other fun thing about why I like these audience recordings. You can kind of hear the energy of the crowd too. You'll hear people start clapping along. You'll hear
yeah,
people start yelling
yeah,
in the background and stuff. And you can hear what it, you have to put yourself in this time frame. And if you're not old enough to remember this, before the internet, before MTV, before all this stuff, this was for these people their only chance. They had only heard about Black Sabbath. They had some of their albums. They may have never ever have seen these guys on television or live or anything. They may have seen a picture here or there or
yeah,
just on the album cover. So there's just real energy and excitement, and it was really an event, and you can
yeah,
sense that a lot of times in these recordings. I think it's fun where sometimes in these audience recordings you can hear them talking like
yeah,
when the show's getting started, or
yeah,
I don't think it made either of our lists, but there's a Wichita, Kansas
mhm,
recording where you hear this guy come out on the microphone before the show. Hey man, Wichita, man, it's like, man, this is a really groovy scene here. Now listen, man, Black Sabbath, they don't like to be hyped, man. They just
yeah,
come out on stage and they rock, man. So listen, everybody sit tight, be cool, be groovy, and Black Sabbath's going to be with you here in a few
Yeah,
moments.
yeah.
Because
That's
that's the
yeah,
way shows were back then. Bands just
yeah,
kind of came up whenever they did, and they tuned up on stage, and you can hear all these just little the atmosphere of the 70s, comes
yeah.
through on a lot of these recordings, and I think that that's awesome. So, all right, 73. We're on 1973. You got something from 73?
I have I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Brescia, Italy. They did three shows in Italy. This is my favorite of the three. Sound quality, I would say, is a little bit better than Sheffield. Now you didn't like Sheffield that much. I think Sheffield's good. This is better. Very audible. It's also an audience. It's not a soundboard, but it's a really good audience. And I mean the set list is pretty consistent with everything that they did. We started out with the intro. Yeah, Tomorrow's Dream, Sweet Leaf, War Pigs, Snowblind, Killing Yourself to Live, Wicked World, guitar solo, which is actually part of Wicked World, but goes into Orchid, and then a jam, and then back to Wicked World, finishes Wicked World, begins with Embryo, and Children of the Grave, and it ends with Paranoid. It's just a really good, tight set. Even the improv is like it rolls along really well. There's no wasted time. It's like they're good jams. They're in the moment. But like I said, early on, you were talking about 69, 70, you could feel the bands getting used to each other. They're starting to play off one another. By this time, 1973, they're overseas, they're in Italy. They're
Hmm.
like a well-oiled machine. 1973, this band is off and running. And it seems like there isn't anything that one of them couldn't do that the other one wouldn't be able to play off of. So I picked this show because I think it's a really good example of how tight the band was. Um, and it's a great set list. I mean, these are all songs we've heard a million times, but they all sound good. And they're early versions of the songs before the band started playing Tomorrow's Dream, like, oh, I don't know, 689 times or something.
Yeah.
This is probably like maybe the 10th time they played it. So it's
Yeah.
fresh and it's exciting. And there's some excitement in the way that the band is performing it. So, yeah, so that's why 1973 Italy made my list, made my 1973 list.
Nice. Okay, 1974. I picked this particular show for a very specific reason. This is Brisbane Festival Hall, Brisbane, Australia, November 7th, 1974. This is not a good Ozzy show. Ozzy says right from the beginning of the show that just he's having problems with his throat. Ozzy even all that considered, it's not like a bad Ozzy show like you would have heard in the last 20 years or so. He just doesn't go for any of the higher notes. He even drops out. Sometimes he just doesn't sing at all. So why on earth would I pick this? Because of Tony Iommi. If you're a Tony Iommi fan, I don't know if it's because Ozzy is sick, losing his voice, so Iommi tries to pick up some of the slack. You get these super long jams. Sabracadabra has this spot where the band starts playing like this funky riff. Bill Ward's playing
Yeah.
like this funky pattern. Geezer's
Yeah.
has like an effect on his bass, and
Yeah.
Iommi is just going off. And the solo that he takes in Wicked World, and at least I think it's in Wicked World, right? What do we get here? What are they jamming on at this point? Is it still we get like
You get from Sabracadabra, you get the jams, you get the guitar
yeah,
solo. And, sometimes
right,
I'm happy, which is what they call that, with the part that jam where Ozzy sings
right.
the line "Sometimes I'm happy,"
You
and then
get
it goes
this.
into Supernaut.
Yep, you get this super long solo section where you get some Orchid in there. You get Megalomania, like an
Yeah,
early
yeah,
Megalomania, where you get Ozzy singing in his lower range, like the first kind of 25% of the song, the first and like second part of the song. That's super interesting. Alternate lyrics kind of sounds like gibberish lyrics from Ozzy, but it's super
yeah,
interesting. You mentioned Sometimes I'm Happy. They go into a drum solo. They come out into Supernaut. But Iommi's playing on this is just, he does this during this whole jam section here. And he does this in other settings too, where he turns his distortion down and he starts playing jazzy, like this kind of clean jazzy guitar playing, this gypsy jazz. Django Reinhardt, who was a huge influence on Iommi, you really hear him stretching out and playing these jazz lines that are just like, sometimes Iommi's guitar solos can sound messy and sloppy when he's trying to play too fast. But this, he's just getting all, with the Sabracadabra thing, he's getting all funky and playing these like jazzy, funky lines. He's just all over this recording. He sounds great, even within the context of the songs. Like in the beginning of the show, you get Tomorrow's Dream, you get Sweet Leaf, Killing Yourself to Live, War Pig, Snowblind, and then it's basically the rest of the show is a huge jam. I mean, the
Yeah.
last like half of this show, it's
Yeah.
a two-disc set here. The second disc is basically all a jam until they get to Children of the Grave at the very end and Paranoid. So there's tons of jamming on this, and Iommi, his guitar sounds great. I don't know if I've ever heard, I haven't heard every live recording, obviously, that's out there, but this one just really jumps out at me. If you're an Iommi fan like we all are here, you need to check this one out for Tony Iommi. And this is the joy of these shows. We've said it a couple
Yeah.
times here already, finding these little nuggets where
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever played some of this stuff ever again after the show. And it was probably the circumstances with Ozzy being ill. The band felt like they needed to just jam. And it's really, really cool and really made me. I mean, I always knew Tony Iommi is a great guitar player, but often when you think about Iommi, you justifiably so mention the riffs first. He's the godfather of the riff. He's the king of the riff. No one's going to argue with that. Sometimes his lead playing doesn't get talked about enough. And when I'm listening to this 1974, I mean, okay, Blackmore's out there at this time, Clapton's out there, but man, sometimes you forget how great of a lead player and how great of an improviser Tony Iommi was, and it makes you realize why Ian Anderson wanted Iommi and Jethro Tull because he was just a great, great
Yeah.
player. And so that's why I picked this 1974 Brisbane, November 7th, Australia show.
Yeah, that is a great show, and you're right. I haven't thoroughly thought of it from that perspective, but it is a show where Tony Iommi really shines, and I guess probably because he's compensating for Ozzy. Ozzy's yeah on that recording, he's almost barely audible, and when he is, he's kind of croaking it out a little bit, and it's
Yeah.
not very good. So for that reason, I kind of always put it aside. But you're right. You know, it is from that perspective of the rest of the band pulling together. It's really good performance wise. For me, I picked Pittsburgh Civic Arena, February 1st, 1974. Ozzy sounds good. We're getting close to where I would consider Ozzy being at his absolute peak. He sounds really good on this. They do a National Acrobat
Nice.
um, after War Pigs. We also get Cornucopia, which is another rare tune. So Cornucopia was only played 25 times in the 70s, and National Acrobat was only played, excuse me, 7 times.
Wow.
So yeah, so that makes this pretty cool. Other than that, you go from after Cornucopia, you hear Sabracadabra, and there from that point on, it's just jam, bonanza, guitar solos. Sometimes I'm happy, drum solo, Supernaut is inserted in there. Coming out of Supernaut, you got the guitar solo and then Sabracadabra reprise. So the second half of the show is basically what they were doing night after night. And of course, I'm not sure if we talked about this, but the most popular version of the 74 show is the California Jam Ontario Motor Speedway. And if you're a Sabbath fan, you've heard it. And it's cool. There's some great jamming on that, but I'm a little bit burned out on it. I think I've probably heard that just as many times as I've heard the studio albums. So it's cool to hear another show, especially when I'm getting a National Acrobat live and I'm getting Cornucopia live. So that's why this was my pull from 74. Pittsburgh,
Nice.
February 5th.
I forgot that I have a 73 show here, New Zealand 73. And the reason why I put this one on the list, and I should have looked this up, they play Changes
Yeah,
live.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's got to be, I don't think they play that more than two or three times.
No, I
They played
think it was
that,
like three times, three or
yeah.
four times.
If you're looking at like songs that they barely played in the 70s, Changes is one of them. Maybe Backstreet Kids is another one that only got played like two or three times.
Three times, yeah.
Yeah, very, very rare. And then maybe the next might be like The Warning, which got like four or five times. So yeah, for that alone, and Ozzy sounds pretty good on it. I put this 73 New Zealand show. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard Tomorrow's Dream, Sweet Leaf, War Pigs. Sweet Leaf is another one that they didn't play a whole ton of times in the
No,
70s. I mean, it was one that kind of came in and out of the set list there, and then it just kind of didn't, you didn't see it in the second half of the 70s. It didn't really get played at all. So kind of hearing, as odd as it sounds, hearing Ozzy do Sweet Leaf in the 70s is kind of unique in and of
yeah,
itself.
sort of rare actually. Yeah,
Okay, so we are on what, 75 or 76?
75, 75. Yeah. Wow. This is one. This is my favorite live Black Sabbath. Long Beach Arena, Long Beach,
Mm,
California, September 7th, 1975. It to me is just fantastic. Ozzy sounds incredible.
yeah,
He sounds flawless. I mean, so we're doing Megalomania. It sounds like he just came from the studio and sang in this performance. I mean, it is. You can say, oh, one of the reasons they didn't do Megalomania is because Ozzy couldn't hit the high notes, and that's true as time went on. But this is at a point where early in the tour where Ozzy was nailing it. He was just absolutely nailing it. Every song on here, he is full of energy. He sounds great. He's getting the crowd riled up. I love the recording of it. It's an audience recording. The bass isn't really articulate. Drums are kind of barely audible, but Tony's tone is
yeah,
awesome. Ozzy's voice is awesome. The song, the set list is awesome. But what I enjoy when I listen to this is it swallows me up in atmosphere. I can hear in my stereo, I can hear the crowd around me, which is one of the cool things about the audience. You get that ambiance,
yeah,
so it makes you feel like you're at the show, as opposed to the soundboard where, as you explained, there's no reason to have the audience on the board. So when you get that recording, you don't hear the audience. You're just hearing the instruments, and a lot of times it's pretty dry. In this situation with this audience, I mean, it's like you can hear them chattering, but they're not louder than the band. Everything is just by dumb luck, I'm sure everything is just in its proper place. And I do wish there's a better articulation with the bass. I wish I could hear Geese. I mean, I hear the presence of bass. I don't really hear what
yeah,
he's doing. So that's unfortunate. Bill is sort of in the background, but Ozzy sounds so great, and Tony sounds fantastic, and you really hear that rich Iommi tone on this, and that's so one of the things I love about this performance. But there's some funny things on it too. In the beginning, when I listened to it just the other night, it's like it sounded like a shotgun going off. It was like the dog started barking upstairs as I was listening to it because it must be I don't know what was going on at this particular show, but I do know that Kiss opened up, so it might have been some residual uh pyrotechnics or something from Kiss. But then Ozzy's like, "Oh yeah, man, yeah, dig it," and it's like boom, like this explosion. I'm like,
yeah.
what in the hell's going on, man? This sounds like this is must be like just complete total mayhem. But he comes out, man, and he just tears it up. At another point between songs, it's right before Snowblind, actually. He starts to say that he's like, "Oh man, this next song's about cocaine, and we want to thank my friend who hooked us up." And he starts to say his name, and he goes, "What? Huh? Oh yeah." He starts to say Keith, and he's like, KD. Yeah, we want to thank KD." So that's just goofy. It's goofy stuff like that. But man, he just sounds phenomenal. I'm going to use the word phenomenal because it's like wow, man. And it's not just like it's not just that he hits the notes, he's like really melodic. Like he's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
the right in intonation in his voice. It's like, wow, that sounds even better than the studio version.
It's a
Um,
great performance from
yeah,
him. Yeah,
I
it's
love
one
it.
of the
I
best.
love it.
What's the
Really
set list
enjoyed
on
it.
that one? Read the set list down.
We got Super Czar, which is it's just the intro tape rolling along. And that's when like a lot of the stuff's going off. You know, people are screaming and yelling. There's explosions and stuff. Then it goes into Killing Yourself to Live, Hole in the Sky,
Yeah,
Snowblind, System of the Universe. System of the Universe sounds phenomenal. I mean, his voice is like just locked in, man. The guitar, it's a little bit fast, but I mean that only adds to the intensity. And Ozzy's right there. I mean, he's just like really high, all the high notes. It's just like he's just on it. Um, System of the Universe, War Pigs, Megalomania, great version of Megalomania, as I said. Fabricadabra, and Sometimes I'm Happy, Jam, which is like you said, I think that was part of Geezer's thing where he put that flange or that phaser
hmm
on his bass and he was like jamming on that. It's really cool. Um, the Supernaut ends the first half of the show. Second half of the show is Iron Man. We got Orchid, guitar solo. Rock and Roll Doctor, which is really just it's a preliminary version where it's just a jam. So they're
yeah.
jamming the riff out. There's no vocals. It's not the song structure isn't there yet. It's just the basic riff cycling around. Then from there we go into Black Sabbath. We got Spiral Architect. I'm not sure how
Nice.
many times I actually didn't look that up, but wasn't many times in Spiral Architect. When and actually in the '90s, though, when they started, I think it's on the Reunion album. Then they played Spiral Architect
Yeah,
in the
they kind of
'90s.
brought it back. Yeah,
So yeah, they didn't play it very much in the '70s, but they brought it back for the reunion. So we got Spiral Architect, Embryo, which is the intro to Children of the Grave, and finish up with Paranoid.
this
Stellar.
tour, the Sabotage era, this era is to me my favorite era of the band because you get in a live setting because the set list is you're getting the most out of the set. You're getting the most new stuff. When they get to Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, they start officially playing little from the new records. Like we already mentioned that Backstreet Kids barely got played. All Moving Parts only got played a handful of times. The only thing off of Technical Ecstasy that got played regularly was Dirty Women, and Gypsy even only got played a couple times. Never Say
Yeah.
Die. The only thing that got played off of that was Never Say Die, Shockwave. Uh, was there anything else ever even played off of Never Say Die?
Yeah. Junior's Eyes was
Yeah,
played
Junior's
once or
Eyes
twice.
got like one or two plays too. That's another where I don't know if there's any recordings of that even exist. Do they? Junior's
Not yet.
Eyes?
Not
Yeah.
yet. I haven't come across it.
So
Hopefully
this
at some point.
Sabotage era is a sweet spot for me where you're getting Hole in the Sky and Megalomania, yet you're still getting Killing Yourself to Live and some of the stuff from Spiral Architect. You're still getting Volume 4 stuff and Sabbath
Yeah.
Bloody Sabbath stuff. Whereas when Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die hit, and it's just a natural thing as bands get more records, it gets they have to do Children of the Grave, they have to do, all these other
Definitely.
things, and it starts eating up the set list, and you don't get that many new songs. The set lists start to
Yeah.
get really repetitive once after this period of the band. So this is a real nice. I love stuff from the Sabotage tour because you're getting these cool things from Sabotage. You're still maybe getting a Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and a Volume 4 thing, and so yeah, great era for the band. So what are we on
Yeah.
here? 76?
76. Yeah. So I got two picks for 76. I have an audience recording that's really good. Ozzy sounds good, but his voice is starting to diminish a little bit from where he is, where we left off in 75 in San Bernardino. We're getting into the 76, 77 era, and he's getting close to where he ends up on set 1978, which is by and large not good in 78. 76, it's good, and this is a good performance. It's an audience, Madison Square Garden. Starts off with Superstar, Sympathy of the Universe, not nearly as good as 75, but he's holding his own. Snowblind, All Moving Parts,
Mm.
Stand Still, War Pigs, Gypsy, Black Sabbath, Dirty Women, drum solo, guitar solo, Rock and Roll Doctor. This is the actual Rock and Roll Doctor because now Technical Ecstasy's out, so it's the full song. Another guitar solo, Electric Funeral on this tour was kind of rare. It
Yeah.
did get played quite a few times in the 70s, but on 1976, 77, I think it was only played a few times and it was dropped from the set list. So Electric Funeral, Iron Man, Children of the Grave, and then finishing up with Paranoid. So this is a good show. Ozzy sounds good. It's an audience, so the recording isn't that great. For a good recording, but not complete show, I have another one of these vinyl vinyl FM broadcasts. This is Syracuse 1976 New York State broadcast. I'm not sure what that was. Maybe it was a college radio station or something. So it's an abbreviated set list. It's a 2-record set, but the sound quality is great. Ozzy sounds really good. Great version of Gypsy on this. Great version of All Moving Parts, Stand Still. And you could really hear Jez. You can really hear the keyboards in this, and they're not too loud. But in that part where it's kind of like that funky Fat Albert kind of part, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term, you can really hear it. It's cool. It really gives it kind of it gives it a cool feel. You don't hear it. It's on the album. It's in the studio. It's the same thing he does in the studio, but it's mixed kind of low, or it's like balanced really well below the guitar and in the bass. It's sort of in and around that frequency. On this, it's a little bit louder, and it just sounds cool hearing it. But Ozzy sounds really good. Everything's audible. Good mix. So from All Moving Parts, Stand Still, we got Dirty Women, drum solo, guitar solo, again, Electric Funeral, Snowblind, and Children of the Grave. And then it kind of cuts off. I'm sure that they played Paranoid, but it's not on this recording. But as far as sonic quality, this is a really enjoyable listen as a live album, as a live recording from 76. So I had to say both of these on my picks for 76.
Yeah, and I'm gonna comment here.
Partial, partial to Technical Ecstasy anyway, so yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to pick two from 76.
I have a theory on, and you're exactly right, that this is when Ozzy's voice starts to decline. And I have a theory on why this is happening. Without getting too deep into it, the first two Black Sabbath records, the guitars, Tony Iommi's and Geezer, were tuned to what's called pitch, meaning their guitars were not tuned down, they were tuned to like what's a standard pitch. Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, all to varying degrees, they tune the guitars down 3 steps. And with Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, Ozzy was really pushing his range with the guitars tuned down. So what that means is they take the guitars, they lower the pitch of the guitars. Technical Ecstasy, they tuned back up again. So live, when they were doing songs from Sabotage, like Symptom of the Universe, for instance, in the live setting, Ozzy was singing that 3 steps higher than the studio recording. So
Mm.
that was already at the top of his range, and now he's pushing his range 3 notes higher than if so anything from volume 4, like Snowblind, or anything from Sabbath Bloody Sabbath or Sabotage in the live set from the Techno Ecstasy or Never Say Die tour, Ozzy is singing all those songs 3 notes higher than they were on the recording, which is insane. And that's, in my opinion, where he officially begins to damage his voice, because he's singing these songs 3 notes higher than they were when
Yeah.
they're already pretty high on the recordings. And this is where he starts to damage his voice.
Yeah, and even in 75, where I was talking about the San Bernardino show, where it sounds so great and he's so on. But if you listen to shows after that, and I'm not talking about the Providence or the Asbury Park, those are still pretty good. They're not as good as far as Ozzy is concerned, not as good as the San Bernardino, but they're good overall. There's a good mix, there's a good overall sound, everything's audible. But as it goes on, then at one point, the second part of the chorus, he doesn't sing it high. He
Yeah.
sings it low. And that's distracting So even though I'm like kudos for doing it, but when you know that he in the early part of the tour, or maybe even in an off night, he was doing
Yeah,
it the way that you hear it on the studio album, the way you hear it on Sabotage. Then when you go from there and you hear him singing the chorus, the second part, the second half of the chorus in the lower range, it's like, nah, you should have just not done it. But yeah, I mean that makes total sense. Because I mean he is really like blasting it out
yeah,
on that San Bernardino show. But I mean he sounds comfortable, and it's not just like he's not just like yelling. He's not just screaming.
yeah,
He actually has a good intonation. He's in the
yeah,
high range, but it's very melodic,
yeah.
which is what makes it sound so cool.
Okay, for 1977, I have Lund, Sweden. This is 4/21/77. This is the only show that was on my list, at least, that is a radio broadcast. This is a fairly common bootleg that you can see pop up here and there. I picked this one because of what we were just talking about. When we get into 77 and 78, the last tour, Ozzy's voice is really, there's moments where it just sounds like he's croaking. He starts to take this tone to his voice. But here, I think he sounds pretty good, and it's got a good set list. Most interesting of note is Gypsy is in this set list, which is something that didn't get played a whole lot. But you get a Super Czar, the intro tape, Symptom of the Universe, Snowblind, War Pigs, Gypsy, Black Sabbath, Dirty Women, a full rock and roll doctor, guitar solo, Electric Funeral, NIB, Paranoid, and Children of the Grave. So this one gets for Gypsy the good sound quality because it is from a somewhat more official, controlled source, and the fact that Ozzy, again, at this point, you get a lot of Ozzy struggling live, and he's pretty together on this one.
Yeah, that's a really good show. That's a very popular show too. What's cool about it being popular is it's from one of their least popular albums.
Yeah.
Very popular show. Lund, Sweden. I think it has a lot of different names. I think one of the names it was bootleg. It was on vinyl. It was on CD. On CD, you're most likely to find it called "Killing Yourself to Die."
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the vinyl version, it had the title "Doomsday Recitation." I
Okay.
think it was Doomsday Recitation. And anytime I saw that, it was like a plain white sleeve, and it had this picture taped on the front of it with like
Hmm.
scotch tape. It was like a house, or a house that was like dilapidated, and it was like Lucifer talking to somebody. And I just remember that image was on the Doomsday Recitation version of this Lund, Sweden show. It's a very popular show, and even back in the 80s, early part of the 80s, you were very likely to find it in your local record store. At least not like your chain record stores, but mom and pop stores would
Yeah.
probably have it. So
That's an interesting and little aside that you mentioned there, that in the 70s, when these records that you're showing are modern, stuff that's been put out in the last 5, 10 years or whatever. But in the 70s, when people made vinyl bootlegs, you saw that very often where the sleeve was just a plain white sleeve, and they would take like a Xerox. That's literally what it looked like. A lot of times it would be
yeah,
on like a weird colored orange paper or something like that, that was just
yep.
taped to the front of the record, of the sleeve, I mean, and the record on the inside. This is just another interesting little aside, and I don't know, maybe they did this to try to avoid any issues. Sometimes why did I just forget what it's called on the record?
The label,
The
the,
label.
the, the
Yeah,
sticker
on the
label.
label would be just like like they printed it off of a printer and just stuck it on there. And sometimes they would even have like weird song titles on it, like different. I have a Ozzy Randy boot where on the inside of the thing it's just these random song titles. I don't know if it was just them trying to avoid getting busted with it or something, but yeah,
No.
it's really, that's sort of a unique thing when you see bootleg vinyls from the 70s. Most of them are that white cover with just something taped to the cover, or sometimes it'll just have writing on it. It might even be as simple as that, which is really funny.
Yeah. sometimes they would have that. There was a record store in Delaware that I used to go to that would get a lot of these bootlegs from various bands, not just Black Sabbath, but Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Scorpions, whoever. And a lot of them had naked ladies, pictures of naked ladies
Yeah.
taped in. So I think it was probably made by somebody in a foreign country that's well, we might sell these. We might sell more of these if we put a picture of it. And it was like something from Penthouse or Playboy
Yeah.
or something. It'd be like a naked lady, and it's like, what? Wow, what's going on here? This is like, what the hell does this have to do with anything? But and then there it was, naked ladies, and some of them were actually. It wasn't just taped on. I mean, there was quite a few of those. But then when they would press these or print them professionally, they'd have like the name of the band not in the logo, just in some
Yeah.
nondescript font, and they would give it a name like who knows what, I don't know. You think of something outrageous. That's what they would name it, and then they'd have a picture of like a naked lady like pouring like
Yeah.
honey down, from a bottle under a chest or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that. It was just weird. The whole bootleg thing was just like it's just strange. But I mean, you took a chance on it, and some of them were actually really good. And some of these, the thing about it though is when we got into the internet and we were hearing, I mean, a lot of these, I think, the sound quality, you had sort of a precarious sound quality to begin with. And when you're pressing it to vinyl and you have surface noise, or you have some of the other limitations that vinyl, or at least vinyl
Yeah.
pressed in this particular way, had, it diminishes the overall sound quality. And so when you go back and you listen to those, that maybe was the first time you heard that show from 72, or maybe it was the first time you heard the uh, California Jam show. When you listen to these digital versions that come out and they're wave files, lossless, I mean, it sounds so much fuller. It actually
Yeah.
really sounds like when you put that on a decent stereo and you crank it up, man, it sounds like you're at the show. So, you know, wasn't much we could do about it at the time because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the advantage of having some of these things in better quality. And also, you never knew what generations. That's another thing that we should have mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
You sometimes have to upgrade these recordings and pay attention to what you have versus what is becoming available, because you might get a master. And I'm pretty sure that 75 San Bernardino show, I'm sorry, I keep calling it San Bernardino. It's Long Beach Arena. Long Beach Arena. That's a master. So that's a first generation. It hasn't been duplicated 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
You're not losing any of the sound quality. It's the sound quality. It's taken directly from the master, and it just sounds great. So when you had these things in the 70s or the 80s, these records, you don't even know. I mean, it might have been fourth generation, might have been recorded from something
Yeah.
onto something else, and then pressed to a record. So you
Yeah.
might think, oh well, yeah, I've heard that show. It doesn't sound that great. Well, not necessarily. You might do well to check out another version that just came out, because you might be surprised at how much better it sounds. Same recording or same show, maybe even the same recording, but it could be from the master, it could be from a much lower generation, so you're getting a better sound quality overall. So anyway,
All right. You got a show from 78, the last
I managed to find two. It's hard to find any from the US that are really any good. The band in general sounds pretty spent. Ozzy really sounds bad. There's a couple shows I really wanted to put in my queue there, but he just sounded so horrible. Symptoms of the Universe was a struggle. It was cringy
yeah.
on most of the shows I listened to, but I did find Germany. Um, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the venue, but it's from October 14th, 1978. Ozzy sounds good. The band sounds good. Not a stellar performance, but for 78, it's pretty damn good. I'm still opening up with Super Czar, Symptom of the Universe. Ozzy's pacing it, not going real high. He's keeping it at a controllable level as far as his voice is concerned. So it sounds pretty good. Snowblind, I like the 78 performances of Snowblind. I like the performance, especially on Hammersmith Odeons. It's one of my favorite versions of Snowblind live. I like his inflections in between the vocal lines, in between the verses. He does that here. So that's cool. It's a highlight for me. Snowblind. I got War Pigs pretty much by the numbers. Not a lot of no surprises there. Never Say Die is okay. Um, it's a little rough. Ozzy's voice is going up high. Not really in control of it. Um, but it's a deep track, so it's cool to hear it live. Berries Where Boots is next. Then we got Shockwave, which Shockwave was only performed 13 times in the 70s. And it sounds pretty good. There's other versions I've heard I listened to before getting to this one where I was like, oh man, they really screwed that up. That's too bad. I hope I can find a better version. Well, I found this is the better version. This is from Germany, and it's a better version. It's a good night, I guess, for Shockwave. After that, we got Dirty Women, pretty decent. Rock and Roll Doctor, drum solo, band jam, nothing real remarkable. Guitar solos, including Orchid. Electric Funeral sounds good, but there again, Ozzy's not really, he's not really high. He's pretty much in a neutral tonality for that song, so it sounds cool. Um, Sounds like pretty much like it does on Paranoid. And then it ends with this particular recording ends with Iron Man, which it cuts off, but I'm sure they do Paranoid after that, so it's not the complete show. But what's here is one of the better ones from '78 overseas. Now, domestically here in Pittsburgh, and this is a radio broadcast, as most of these vinyl versions are. This is really good, really good. Again, Ozzy's pretty much, he's staying in neutral territory. He's not going to any great lengths on these songs. He's pacing himself, but the recording is really good. Everything is really, really audible. Especially enjoy. Let me show you the cover, and it actually is a picture from '78, so that's cool. They got
Yeah.
that right. And picture from 1970 though. So but anyway, back cover, just the song title. So we got they obviously decided to omit Symptom of the Universe. It must have sounded that bad where they didn't even put it on here. So the show starts off, side one starts off with Snowblind, and which is good. Good version of Black Sabbath after that. Um, Side B, we have Dirty Women, Rock and Roll Doctor. So you got all of side B is dedicated to technical ecstasy. Side C, we've got Wasp Behind the Wall of Sleep, basically an NIB. It's pretty cool. Then Electric Funeral, and then Iron Man. Good side. So everything sounds good. Good recording. Ozzy sounds good. Finally, side D, we've got Berries Where Boots, Children of the Grave, and finishes up with Paranoid. So between these two, we get the full end. We don't get the beginning on this one, but we do get the beginning on this one,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Although it's not that bad. I mean, there's far worse. 1978. I think I was listening to one from Florida. Oh my God, it was just it was so bad.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was so bad. I felt bad for Ozzy. And you're right. I mean, a lot of it could be, just he blew his voice out.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of factors. When you go into the historical background of the band at this point, there was a lot of things going on. I do want to mention, one of the shows that I think it was the one from Florida, though I'm not positive, but he apologizes to the audience for canceling the night before. And this is the historic thing where they had to cancel the show because they couldn't find him. Remember
Yeah.
when he goes
Yeah.
into the wrong hotel room and they're
Yeah.
looking for him, they can't find him, and he like crashes. He stumbles into the wrong hotel room, and he just crashes there, and no one knows where he is, and they couldn't find him the whole next day, so they had to cancel the show. So he apologized to the audience for that. So even though the performance was horrible, I almost picked that one because of the historical significance of that. But I mean, that's where we are in 1978.
Yeah.
I mean, Ozzy pretty much checked out. He pretty much checked out in '76, as we know. You follow the history, but he got it together, came back in the band, and recorded the two albums, did Technical Ecstasy, and then recorded Never Say Die with less interest in Never Say Die. And then, of course, his father died, and he was struggling with that, and drugs and alcohol came into it with him and Bill especially, but all of them. I mean, it was pretty much basically a system, but it hit Ozzy the worst. And of course, shortly after this, well, they did the tour, and then Ozzy was formally fired, and then Ronnie James Dio came in and gave the band a real shot in the arm. But it's interesting because when we go from 1969 to 79, and we're practically talking about the 10 years here, and man, 10 years goes by really fast. And you're talking about a band that was really young, top of their
Mhm.
game, working towards the top of their game, starting out slow, working up, having to peak at around 74, 75, and then start to decline the end of 75, 76, and then pretty much hit rock bottom in 78. That's how it was. It was like
Yeah,
up and down.
yeah,
So that's one of the real cool thing about the 70s era of Black Sabbath. When we get into the Dio era, I mean, I've already listened to a bunch of Dio stuff in preparation for that. I mean, there really are no bad shows. There isn't a bad Dio show, really.
yeah,
The only thing that might diminish one show from the other is the way that it's recorded.
yeah.
But you know, not the case with Ozzy, though, unfortunately.
All right, well, there you go. There's pretty epic Sabbath Sunday here for you. It's going and deep diving into the unreleased bootleg and live stuff out there. I'm going to try to as many of the shows as I can, or maybe, at least half the shows. I'll put links down below because a lot of these shows, people have put them up on YouTube, so you can check some of these out too. Uh, Let us know what you think of our picks. Anybody else out there got some live Sabbath stuff that they have from the 70s that they think is great? Share it down in the comments down below. We're going to be touching on the other eras of the band too on future episodes. So thanks to
I've got
everybody
some
out there.
I've got some great, really, really good born again shows, not just the ones that
Yeah,
everybody's heard. I've got a couple that I was really impressed with. So people that are fans of Born Again will be talking about that. And, I'm talking about now a couple spoilers. Nah, I'll wait. But there's some shows on the Born Again. There's some songs on the Born Again shows that they did not play live very often. And so I've got a couple of those really great sound quality. Really fun to talk about those because I haven't been the biggest supporter of Born Again, but yeah, these Born Again shows are pretty awesome. So looking forward to that.
yeah, that's going to be fun. All right, let us know in the comments down below what you guys think, and we will see you at the next Sabbath Sunday.